The iron bell rang once. Then again. Each strike echoed through the underground market like a sentence being passed. Chains rattled. Voices murmured. Coins clinked. The air smelled of damp stone, sweat, and desperation, the scent of people who had nothing left to lose. Serafina Vale stood barefoot on the cold platform, clutching her baby so tightly her arms trembled. Her daughter, Leora, was barely 6 months old. She slept anyway. That was the cruelest part. Even surrounded by shouting men, leering eyes, and the sharp crack of the auctioneer's whip against the stone floor, the baby slept peacefully, unaware that her entire existence was being priced like livestock. Lot 23, the auctioneer announced, his voice bored, practiced. Human female. Healthy. No criminal record. Comes with infant. Mother suitable for labor or household service. Starting bid. 30 gold crowns, a voice interrupted from the crowd. Serafina flinched. She didn't lift her head. She couldn't. If she looked at them, if she saw their faces, she would break. And if she broke, she was afraid she wouldn't stop screaming. 3 weeks ago, she had been a seamstress. Poor, yes, but free. Then her husband had died. Not in battle. Not with honor. He'd collapsed in the street, coughing blood, his lungs already ruined by the mines he'd worked in since he was 12. The healers demanded payment she didn't have. The landlords wanted rent she couldn't pay. The debt collectors came at night, smiling while they counted her fear. When she begged for time, they laughed. When she begged for mercy, they sold her. Another voice rose. 35. 40. The auctioneer grinned. I see. Healthy hips. Good for bearing more children. Serafina's jaw tightened. She shifted Leora slightly, shielding the baby's face from the torchlight and from the men who stared too long. One of them licked his lips. A memory surfaced, her mother's voice years ago. No matter how poor you are, never let them see your soul collapse. So Serafina stood straighter. Even as her knees shook. Even as tears burned behind her eyes. 50, someone called. The number slammed into her chest. At 50 gold crowns she wouldn't be a maid. She'd be owned. Used. Thrown away when she aged or broke. Her baby would be taken. Sold separately. Raised by strangers, or worse. Serafina's breath hitched. She looked down at Leora's tiny fingers curled against her chest, and something inside her hardened into steel. I won't let them touch you, she swore silently. Even if it kills me. 60. The crowd buzzed. Then. 500. The word cut through the marketplace like a blade. Silence fell so fast it felt unnatural. Serafina's head snapped up. At the edge of the crowd stood a man no one had seen enter. He wore black, not the ragged black of mourning but the deep, immaculate black of wealth and authority. His coat fit him perfectly. His boots were polished. His posture was effortless, commanding, as if the space itself bent around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered. Though his face was pale, unnaturally so, and striking in a way that made breathing difficult. Sharp cheekbones. Dark hair swept back. Eyes the color of molten amber, glowing faintly in the torchlight. Eyes that were locked on her. Not on her body. On her baby. The auctioneer swallowed. My lord. 500 gold crowns, the man repeated calmly. And an additional 300 to clear all existing debts attached to the woman and the child. A ripple of shock tore through the crowd. 800 gold crowns. For a broken seamstress and her infant. The debt master pushed forward, bowing so deeply it was pathetic. Of course, your grace. Entirely acceptable. Serafina's heart pounded. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew power when she saw it. The kind that didn't shout. The kind that didn't need to. The gavel slammed. Sold. The word echoed like a death knell. The chains around her wrists were removed. Papers were signed. Gold changed hands. It was over. She belonged to him now. The man approached the platform, his footsteps soundless against stone. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, cold and heavy like standing before a storm held barely in check. He looked down at her. Can you walk? He asked. His voice was deep, controlled. Not cruel but not gentle either. Yes, she whispered. Good. He turned. Follow me. No threats. No grabbing. No leash. That unsettled her more than violence would have. Outside, a black carriage waited, massive, elegant, pulled by horses bred for war, not transport. The driver didn't look back as they climbed inside. The door shut. The carriage moved. Serafina held her breath until her lungs burned. Finally, she forced herself to speak. Why? The man didn't look at her. Why what? Why pay so much for me? Silence stretched. Then, because you stood between your child and men who terrified you. Her fingers tightened around Leora. I've seen thousands beg, he continued. I've seen nobles grovel and warriors cry. You did neither. She swallowed. That doesn't make me worth 800 crowns. Now he turned. Those amber eyes searched her face, sharp and ancient, as if peeling back layers of fear and grief and resolve. You are wrong, he said quietly. It makes you rare. The carriage rolled on. After a moment he spoke again. My name is King Alaric Nocturne. Her blood turned cold. Everyone knew that name. The Vampire King. Ruler of the Northern Coven. Immortal. Ruthless. Untouchable. A monster in children's stories. A god in whispered prayers. I am not taking you as a slave, he said. Nor will anyone here ever touch you without your consent. She laughed weakly. You bought me. Yes. His gaze dropped to the baby. To protect you. Her heart raced. From what? From a world that devours women like you and calls it law. The carriage slowed. Castle spires rose ahead, black stone against a blood-red sky. Alaric's voice lowered, carrying weight that made her tremble. I will give your daughter my name, he said. My protection. My bloodline. She stared at him in shock. And you, she whispered. He met her eyes. I will be father to the child, he said. And husband to you, if you choose. The carriage crossed the bridge. The gates closed behind them. And Serafina realized her life, her real life, had just begun. The gates of Castle Nocturne closed behind the carriage with a thunderous finality that made Serafina's heart jolt. Stone scraped against stone, iron bars locking into place as if the mountain itself had decided she was no longer allowed to leave. She clutched Leora tighter, instinctively rocking her as the carriage rolled into a vast inner courtyard lit by cold blue flames instead of torches. The fire gave off no heat, only an eerie glow that painted the ancient stone in ghostly light. She had imagined a vampire king's castle would feel like death. Instead it felt like judgment. The carriage stopped. Before Serafina could gather her courage, the door opened and King Alaric stepped down, extending his hand, not to her but to the baby. His movements were precise, careful, almost reverent. For a terrifying second, Serafina hesitated. Then she saw his expression. Not hunger. Not ownership. Protection. She allowed him to steady Leora as she climbed down. The cold stone bit into her bare feet, and immediately a cloak appeared around her shoulders. Alaric had removed it without a word and draped it around her, fastening it himself. Murmurs rippled through the courtyard. Serafina felt them before she heard them, the eyes watching from shadows, from balconies, from behind arched windows. Vampires. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Their gazes burned with curiosity, suspicion, and something sharper. Disapproval. This way, Alaric said quietly. He did not rush her. He did not pull. He matched his pace to hers, even when Leora stirred and whimpered, sensing the unnatural air. As they walked through the massive doors, Serafina became painfully aware of how small she was. How human. How fragile. Inside, the castle was alive with whispers. A human. With a child. Sold in a market. She smells like fear. Serafina's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. Her mother's voice echoed again in her mind. Stand straight. Even when they want you to crawl. They reached a long hall lined with towering pillars carved with ancient symbols. At its end waited a woman dressed in black silk, her silver hair braided tightly down her back. Her eyes, like Alaric's, glowed amber, sharp and assessing. Magistra Eloan, Alaric said. Prepare the eastern chambers. Full protection wards. Immediately. Eloan's gaze flicked to Serafina, then to the baby. Something unreadable passed over her face. As you command, my king, she said, bowing. Then softer to Serafina, come. The child needs warmth. Serafina followed, her legs trembling with exhaustion she had been ignoring for days. The chambers they entered were larger than any home she had ever seen. Thick rugs softened the stone floor. A fire burned low and warm. A cradle already waited near the bed, carved from dark wood etched with protective runes. Serafina froze. You prepared this? She asked faintly. Alaric nodded. I ordered it the moment I decided to intervene. You planned this, she whispered. Yes. For how long? For as long as it took you to choose not to beg. Something in her chest cracked. Leora began to cry, the sharp wail echoing off the stone. Serafina rushed to her, lifting her gently, whispering soft reassurances. Almost instantly, a servant appeared with warm milk, then another with clean linens, then another with food, real food. Bread that smelled rich. Stew thick with meat and herbs. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until her hands shook reaching for it. Alaric stood near the window, keeping his distance, his reflection faint in the glass. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will harm you or the child." "And the marriage?" Serafina asked quietly. He turned, meeting her gaze fully. "That depends on you." Her breath caught. "You said you would be husband and father both." "I said I would offer," he corrected. "Not force." Silence stretched. She studied him then, not as a monster, not as a savior, but as a man shaped by centuries. There was sorrow in him. Loss carved deep beneath the power. "You're feared," she said. "Yes. And yet you bought a stranger and her baby instead of ruling from your throne." "I rule best when I remember why power exists," he replied. "To protect. Not consume." That night, Serafina barely slept. The bed was too soft. The silence too heavy. Every sound made her flinch. But when dawn came, she woke to Leora laughing softly, safe in her cradle, sunlight filtering through enchanted glass that muted its lethal rays. For the first time since her husband died, Serafina cried, not from fear but relief. The days that followed were not easy. The castle staff bowed, but their smiles were strained. Whispers followed her everywhere. Some servants refused to meet her eyes. Others stared openly at the baby, murmuring words like hybrid and risk. One night, as Serafina walked the corridor carrying Leora, a young vampire servant sneered, "Humans breed fast. That's how they survive." Before Serafina could respond, the air shifted. Alaric appeared behind the servant, his presence suffocating. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Repeat that." The servant trembled. I meant no disrespect." "You forgot where you stand," Alaric said. "And who she is." He turned to Serafina. "You will not be insulted in my home." The servant was gone the next day. Exiled. Word spread quickly. So did fear. Yet something unexpected happened. When a human maid collapsed from exhaustion, Serafina helped her. When a vampire child was injured during training, Serafina tended the wound without hesitation, her hands steady despite her fear. When Leora fell ill with a fever no healer could explain, Serafina stayed awake for 3 nights straight, singing softly in a language she didn't know she remembered. An ancient language. One Alaric hadn't heard spoken in centuries. He stood in the shadows, listening, something breaking open inside his immortal chest. She wasn't just kind. She was chosen. And the castle, the ancient watching walls, felt it too. By the end of the week, the whispers had changed. Not human, but queen. And as Alaric watched Serafina rock her child beneath the chandeliers of his ancestral hall, he realized the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't her weakness. It was her heart. Because it was already changing his. The fever came without warning. Leora had been laughing that morning, her small hands gripping Serafina's finger as sunlight filtered through the enchanted windows. By nightfall, her skin burned with unnatural heat, her tiny breaths shallow and uneven. Serafina knew sickness. She had seen hunger fever, winter fever, grief fever. This was none of those. This felt wrong. As if the air itself rejected her child's presence. Serafina screamed for help. Vampire healers arrived swiftly, cloaks whispering across stone, amber eyes glowing as they examined the infant. They murmured among themselves in hushed, ancient tongues. Herbs were burned. Runes were drawn. Blood, dark and shimmering, was offered. Nothing worked. Leora's cries weakened, her eyelids fluttering as though sleep were pulling her away forever. Serafina fell to her knees beside the cradle, clutching her daughter's tiny hand. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's all I have. Take years from me. Take my life. Just don't take her." The healers stepped back. Their faces were pale. King Alaric stood at the foot of the bed, utterly still. He had faced wars, rebellions, extinction itself, but this helplessness tore at him more violently than any blade. His fists clenched slowly at his sides. "What is happening?" he demanded. One of the elder healers bowed deeply. "The child is resisting us, my king." "Explain," Alaric growled. "She carries human blood," the healer said carefully. "But something else too. Something old. The magic meant to heal her is being rejected, not absorbed." Serafina looked up sharply. "Rejected?" "Yes," the healer said. "As if her body knows it does not belong to darkness." The word struck Alaric like a blow. "She is not cursed," the healer continued. She is protected. Serafina pressed her forehead to Leora's. Her tears fell freely now. I don't care what she is. She's a baby. Alaric stepped forward, his voice low but iron-bound. Then find another way. The healers exchanged glances. Finally the eldest spoke again. There is one possibility. But it has not been attempted in centuries. Say it, Alaric ordered. The child must be calmed by a binding resonance, the healer said. A voice that speaks the first tongue. The language of origin. The language of balance. Serafina froze. That's impossible, another healer muttered. Only the ancient bloodlines. Serafina's voice cut through them, trembling. What language? The healer turned to her slowly. The first tongue. The one sung before vampires and humans were divided. Her breath caught. I don't know why, Serafina whispered, fear threading through her words, but when she cries, something rises in me. Words I've never learned. Songs I've never been taught. Alaric's gaze snapped to her. Show us, he said quietly. Serafina hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this would change everything. That once spoken aloud, there would be no turning back. But Leora whimpered, weak and fading. That decided it. Serafina gathered her daughter into her arms and began to sing. The sound that filled the chamber was not loud, but it was powerful. Soft, flowing syllables shimmered in the air, ancient and beautiful, vibrating through stone and blood alike. The runes on the walls glowed faintly. The fire bowed lower. Even the vampire stepped back, eyes wide with awe. Leora's breathing slowed. Her fever broke. A hush fell. Serafina collapsed into the bed, clutching her child, sobbing with relief as Leora's tiny chest rose and fell steadily once more. The healers knelt. All of them. It is as the prophecy warned, the eldest whispered. The child of balance, born of suffering, shielded by light. Alaric stared at Serafina as if seeing her for the first time. That night, the council convened without her knowledge. They gathered in the obsidian hall, ancient vampires, warlords, nobles, faces tight with concern and ambition. She cannot remain, one counselor hissed. A human woman who speaks the first tongue? A child immune to darkness? This threatens the order. She will weaken him, another said. Already he defies tradition for her. Alaric listened in silence. Until he didn't. She will stay, he said, his voice echoing with lethal calm. Anyone who challenges that decision challenges me. You would risk war for a human? A counselor demanded. Alaric rose from his throne. I would burn this world to ash to protect my family, he said. And make no mistake, she is my family. The council fell silent. Elsewhere, Serafina sat beside Leora's cradle, exhausted beyond words. When Alaric entered, she looked up, fear flickering. Are we in danger? He knelt before her. A king kneeling. Yes, he said honestly. But not from me. She swallowed. I never wanted power. Or prophecy. I know, he said softly. That is why I chose you. She searched his face. What happens now? Alaric reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently touching Leora's hand. Now, he said, I stop pretending this is an arrangement. Serafina's breath hitched. I will not ask you to marry me yet, he continued. But I will protect you both as if you already had. For the first time since she entered the Vampire King's world, Serafina didn't feel like prey. She felt like something far more dangerous. Oh. The assassination attempt came at dawn. Not with screams. Not with chaos. But with silence. Serafina woke to a cold absence in the room, the kind of stillness that made her skin prickle. The enchanted lamps were dimmer than usual. The fire had burned down to embers. Leora slept peacefully in her cradle, her small chest rising and falling in soft rhythm. Too peaceful. Serafina sat up. That was when she smelled it. Blood. Not fresh. Not spilled. Weaponized. She barely had time to gasp before the shadows near the door peeled themselves into form. A vampire stepped forward, tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath a hood lined with sigils meant to block detection. His presence pressed down on her like a suffocating weight. You should never have come here, he whispered. Serafina moved without thinking. She threw herself over Leora's cradle, shielding her child with her own body. If you're here for me, she said, her voice shaking but fierce, then do it. Leave her alone. The vampire paused. Something in her tone, raw, defiant, human, made him hesitate. That hesitation saved her life. The air exploded. The assassin was ripped backward, slammed into the wall with bone-crushing force. Stone cracked. Shadows screamed. King Alaric stood in the doorway, eyes blazing molten gold, fangs fully bared. "You entered my private chambers," he said softly. "That was your final mistake." The assassin struggled, pinned by invisible force, choking as Alaric approached. "The council sent you," Alaric continued, "or you volunteered. Either way you chose treason." The hood fell back. Lord Valethorn, one of the oldest nobles in the coven. Seraphina's stomach dropped. "She will destroy us," Valethorn hissed. "The child is an abomination. The woman is a weapon you don't understand." Alaric didn't raise his voice. "That woman," he said, "is under my protection." "And the prophecy?" Valethorn spat. "You'd sacrifice our future for my family," Alaric interrupted. The force tightened. Valethorn's body convulsed. Seraphina screamed. "Alaric, stop." Everything froze. Alaric turned slowly toward her. She stood shaking, tears streaking her face, one hand gripping the cradle. "Don't become a monster for us," she pleaded. "Please." The king closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the rage had not vanished, but it was contained. Valethorn collapsed unconscious, alive but broken. "Take him," Alaric ordered the guards who had flooded in. "Strip him of title. Bind his power. Exile him beyond the Black Pass." The guards bowed and dragged Valethorn away. Seraphina sank to the floor. Alaric crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her, cupping her face with trembling hands. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "You came. I will always come," he said. The words settled between them like a vow. By nightfall, the castle buzzed with unrest. The assassination attempt was no longer a secret. Vampires whispered in corridors. Human servants crossed themselves when Seraphina passed. Fear and reverence tangled into something volatile. The council demanded a public response. Alaric gave them one. He summoned the entire coven to the grand hall. Seraphina stood at his side, dressed in deep blue velvet, Leora in her arms wrapped in silver-threaded cloth. Her knees trembled, but she did not step back. Alaric took the throne. "My people," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly. "An attempt was made on the life of a woman and child under my protection." Murmurs rippled. "I allowed debate. I allowed fear. I allowed tradition to blind us," he continued. "No longer." He stood. "This woman was sold like an object. This child was born into suffering. And yet they have shown more courage, compassion, and strength than many of you who were born to power." A noble scoffed. "She is human." Alaric's gaze snapped to him. "And you are cowardly." Silence crashed down. "I will not rule a kingdom that devours the innocent," Alaric declared. "From this day forward, any harm toward Seraphina Vale or her child will be treated as treason against the crown." Gasp. "And let me be clear," he added, his voice dropping to something deadly. "I do not choose her because she is weak. I choose her because she is strong." Seraphina felt tears burn her eyes. Alaric turned to her then, his expression softening in a way only she had ever seen. "You asked once what would happen next." She nodded. He took her hand, lifting it gently. "Now," he said, "you choose." The hall held its breath. She looked down at Leora, safe, warm, alive because this king had chosen mercy over fear. She looked back at Alaric, at the loneliness behind his power, at the restraint he'd shown for her sake. "I choose you," Seraphina said quietly. "Not because I must, but because I want to." The hall erupted. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king smiled without shadows. The engagement was not announced with celebration. There were no bells, no music, no feast. Instead, it spread through the coven like wildfire carried on fear. A human woman. A baby not born of vampire blood. A king who had chosen love over law. By nightfall, the castle felt divided, not by walls but by loyalty. Seraphina sensed it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. In the way some servants bowed deeper than ever, while others avoided her gaze completely. She carried Leora through the corridors with calm determination, refusing to shrink herself, refusing to apologize for existing. But inside she was terrified. She had chosen Alaric publicly. She had placed herself between him and centuries of tradition. And now there would be consequences. They came faster than expected. 3 nights after the announcement, the Black Pass burned. Messengers arrived at dawn, cloaks torn, faces pale with urgency. Exiled nobles had rallied beyond the mountains. Valethorn's name was whispered among them, broken but unrepentant. They called themselves the Pure Blood Assembly, claiming the throne had been corrupted. They demand your abdication, the messenger said, and the surrender of the human woman and the child. Alaric dismissed the court with a single raised hand. When the hall was empty, he turned to Seraphina. I can end this with force. She believed him. She had seen what he could do. And if you do, she asked softly, how many will die? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. That night, Seraphina didn't sleep. She watched Leora breathe, memorizing every rise and fall of her tiny chest. She thought of the marketplace, of chains, of men who believed power meant ownership. She would not let this world repeat that cruelty. At sunrise, she made her decision. The coven assembled again, this time tense and restless. Alaric sat on the throne, armor gleaming darkly beneath his cloak. Seraphina stood beside him, until she didn't. She stepped forward alone. Gasps echoed. My king, a counselor snapped, this is no place. It is exactly my place, Seraphina said. Her voice carried. She felt it, something ancient and steady rising within her. Not magic, not domination, but authority earned through pain. I was sold once, she continued. Not because I was weak, but because others believed I was worthless. I stand here now because one man chose to see my humanity instead of my fear. Murmurs rippled. You call me a threat, she said, turning slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. But I have shed no blood. I have ordered no executions. I have raised no armies. All I have done is protect my child and show kindness where cruelty was expected. A noble laughed bitterly. You think kindness will stop rebellion? Seraphina met his gaze. No. But truth might. She lifted Leora gently, holding her so all could see. This child nearly died because your magic rejected her, she said. And yet she lives. Not because she is stronger than you, but because she belongs to both worlds. Silence deepened. I will not ask you to kneel to me, Seraphina said. I will not demand loyalty. I will only ask this, judge me by what I do, not what I am. She turned back to Alaric. I will stand before the rebels, she said quietly. Alone. The hall erupted. Alaric was on his feet instantly. No. They want me, she said. Not you. Not the crown. Me. I will not risk you, he said, his voice raw. She reached up, cupping his face gently. You already have. And I survived. That night, Seraphina walked beyond the castle gates. Unarmed. Unarmored. Holding her child. The rebels waited in the valley, torches blazing, banners raised. They expected fear. They did not expect a mother. Seraphina stood before them, her voice steady as stone. If you came for blood, she said, then take mine. But if you came for justice, then listen. She spoke of loss. Of hunger. Of what it meant to be powerless in a world ruled by immortals. She spoke of Alaric, not as a king but as a man who chose mercy when it cost him authority. By dawn, swords lowered. By sunrise, banners fell. The rebellion ended not with war, but with surrender. When Seraphina returned, exhausted and trembling, Alaric caught her before she could fall. In front of everyone he knelt. You are my queen, he said. Not because of prophecy. Not because of blood. But because you ended a war with compassion. Tears streamed down her face. And for the first time the coven bowed, to a human woman who had rewritten their fate. The wedding was not announced as a conquest. It was announced as a promise. When the black banners of House Nocturne were replaced with silver and midnight blue, the coven understood that this was not a ceremony of domination but of union. The castle transformed, not into something softer but into something truer. Torches burned warmer. Shadows pulled back. Even the ancient stones seemed to breathe differently, as if they recognized a turning point written deeper than law. Seraphina stood in the eastern chapel as dawn faded into night, dressed in a gown woven with silver thread and moonstone beads. She had never imagined herself as a queen. She had imagined survival, warmth, safety for her child. Yet here she was, hands steady, spine straight, heart full of something fierce and unbreakable. Leora rested in her arms, wide-eyed and calm, as though she understood the weight of the moment. When King Alaric entered, the room fell utterly silent. He wore no crown. He did not need one. His power moved with him like a living force, but his gaze sought only Seraphina. Centuries of isolation, violence, and duty had carved him into a ruler feared by the world. Yet in that moment, before the woman who had challenged everything he believed, he looked simply human. They spoke no vows written by tradition. They spoke truth. I was a king long before I was a man, Alaric said. You taught me how to be both. Seraphina lifted her chin, tears shimmering. I was powerless once. You showed me that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. They bound their hands together, human skin and immortal flesh, sealed not by blood but by choice. The coven bowed. Not out of fear. Out of respect. In the days that followed, justice came quietly, but completely. Those who had trafficked humans were stripped of influence and wealth. Markets once used for chains were dismantled. New laws were written, not in ink alone but enforced by the king himself. No human would ever again be sold under nocturne rule. And Seraphina did not rule from the shadows. She walked among both humans and vampires, listening, healing rifts long ignored. She established sanctuaries for the poor, schools for human children, and councils where voices once silenced could finally speak. The coven called it a golden age. They were wrong. It was not gold. It was mercy. One night, as Seraphina watched Leora play near the moonlit windows, the child spoke words no infant should know. Soft, clear, ancient. The first tongue. The runes in the room glowed. Alaric knelt beside his daughter, all written across his immortal face. She will be a bridge, he whispered. Seraphina nodded. Not a weapon. Never, he vowed. Years later, bards would sing of the vampire king who ruled with restraint, and the human queen who ended wars without bloodshed. They would speak of a child born from suffering who carried balance in her voice. But the truth was simpler. A woman was sold. A king saw her worth. And instead of owning her, he stood beside her. In the end, the greatest power was not immortality. It was compassion. And the world was changed forever because one broken girl refused to let her humanity die.